Heather Mac Donald recently authored an article that appeared in the Providence Journal. Uh, and I'm going to quote her article because it really makes sense. She says, when police back off, our streets get mean. FBI Director James Comey ignited a firestorm with his recent observation that violent crime is rising in many cities across the country, and that the probable reason for that is the drop in proactive policing. Comey's observation really ticked off Obama, apparently because it didn't fit Obama's anti-cop narrative. Well, that's too damn bad. Comey did tell the truth, and that's a refreshing change for somebody coming out of this administration. Comey merely confirmed the obvious in his remarks to the Chicago Law School in October. The Major Cities Police Chiefs Association met in an emergency session this past August to discuss this dramatic homicide surge. Murders up to that point were up 76% in Milwaukee, 60% in St. Louis, 56% in Baltimore, 47% in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and 36% in Houston, just to name a few locations around the country. The New York Times even reported that in September, homicides in the 35 big American cities were up 19%, and that 62% of the cities reported an increase in non-fatal shootings. The blog 538 reported homicide data from most of the nation's 60 largest cities in September resulted in a 16% rise. So, Comey's statement that most of America's 50 largest cities have seen an increase in homicides and shootings this year, and many of them have seen a huge increase, is hardly news to anybody, of course, but the president. It should also not be news that officers are backing off of discretionary policing. The available data shows a decline in police activity. In New York City, for example, summonses for low-level quality of life offenses such as urinating in public and drinking in public, which is a prime gauge of proactive enforcement, were down 26% during the first half of 2015. Arrests in every crime category were down 15% as of recent weeks. In Los Angeles, arrests were down 10%, even as violent crime was up 20%. Arrests dropped 56% in Baltimore in May, following the anti-cop riots and the indictment of 6 officers for the death of drug dealer Freddie Gray. Arrests in St. Louis and St. Louis County dropped by a third after the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson and the resulting riots. Officers across the country testify to their reluctance to engage. Quote, "I won't get out of my car for a reasonable suspicion stop. I will if there's a violent felony committed in my presence," they say. Officers are routinely surrounded by hostile, jeering crowds when they try to make an arrest in urban areas. Mayors have noted the results. The evidence across America backs FBI Director James Comey up. And yet, Obama has had the audacity to accuse him of shoddy, biased analysis when he spoke in front of the International Association of Chiefs of Police recently. The very idea that Obama knows more about crime patterns and policing than the FBI director is absolutely laughable. It's Obama who has set the political agenda here. Hell, he spent the last 2 years spouting the dangerous lie that cops and the criminal justice system is racially biased. Obama and his fellow critics of Comey's statement simply refuse to admit that the decrease in proactive policing has anything to do with the surge in violence in our big cities that they have experienced is ridiculous. After all, they have spent the last year shouting at the top of their lungs that pedestrian stops and quality of life violation enforcement oppress minority communities. The police have gotten the message, and they're doing much less of both. You would think that this would be a welcome development to the anti-cop, pro-criminal crowd. Instead, they deny that officers are backing off at all. Why? Because the resulting crime increase shows that policing does, in fact, lower crime. You see, when officers do back off of enforcement, the result is not a great benefit for black lives, as the Black Lives Matter movement predict. As a matter of fact, just the opposite occurs, and they just do not want to admit it. Crime has become emboldened and leads to this year's bloodbath, whose victims have been almost exclusively black and far too often children and innocent bystanders. Okay, crime fighters, I'm Ray the DA, and this is Straight Talk.